humanity vanished for 4,000 years. Then they returned to judge the Galactic Council. The dead do not send messages. I had always believed that. I had built my entire career, 4 centuries of careful scholarship and political maneuvering inside the Galactic Council, on the reliable truth that dead things stay quiet. So when the alert landed on my desk at the 3rd hour of the council session, I did not feel curiosity. I felt something older and colder, something my species had not felt in a very long time. I felt afraid. My name is Vane. I serve as Archivist Prime to the Galactic Council, the body that governs 41 recognized civilizations across this arm of the galaxy. I am what my people call a rememberer. It is my duty to maintain the official record of everything the Council has done, every treaty it has signed, every world it has named, every species it has welcomed or buried. I am very good at my job. I have held this position for 230 years, and in that time I have never once altered a record to serve a political agenda. That, I told myself, made me different from the others. I would learn much later how wrong I was. The session that morning was routine as anything gets when 41 species share a chamber the size of a moon. The agenda concerned the redistribution of resource extraction rights in the region known as the Dead Spiral, a wide band of star systems in the outer rim that had been sitting unclaimed, officially speaking, for 4,000 years. Several council members wanted those systems. The arguments were polite on the surface and furious underneath, as they always are in that chamber. I was half listening, reviewing old boundary maps on my personal terminal, when the cartography report landed in my queue. It came from a junior analyst named Orlin, a young member of the Sahari species who had been assigned to run updated gravitational surveys of the Dead Spiral before the vote. The report was supposed to be a formality. The Dead Spiral was dead, after all. It had been dead for 4,000 years. You survey it, you confirm nothing has changed, you give the council permission to divide it up, and you go home. Orlin had not gone home. Orlin had flagged something that made my 3 hearts beat at different speeds. The gravitational readings from the Dead Spiral were wrong. Not wrong in a small way, not the kind of drift you see from natural stellar movement or dark matter fluctuation. Wrong in the way that a room is wrong when you enter it and realize the furniture has been moved very carefully back to its original position, and only someone who memorized the original placement would ever notice. Something was out there. Something large. Something that was not making a sound. I set down my stylus and read the report 3 times. Then I looked up at the chamber around me, at the 41 representatives of the galaxy's living civilizations, all of them arguing cheerfully over how to divide up what they assumed was empty space. I thought about telling them immediately. I decided first to check the historical record. The humans had occupied the Dead Spiral. That was not a secret. It was simply something no one discussed anymore. 4,000 years is a long time, long enough for even the most dramatic event to become background noise. The disappearance of humanity from the galactic stage had been, at the time, one of the most examined mysteries in recorded history. Every civilization in the Council had sent ships to investigate. Every intelligence service had run theories. Academies had published thousands of papers. And then slowly, as the centuries passed and no answers came, the mystery had simply become a fact. The humans were gone. That was all. They were gone, and their worlds were empty, and the stars that had once lit their cities now lit nothing. I pulled the original records from the archive. I had to go back 4,012 years to find the last confirmed human signal, a routine trade manifest from a station called Kelport, logging a shipment of industrial components to a colony in the outer Dead Spiral. The manifest was unremarkable. There was no distress signal, no political declaration, no war. There was simply the manifest, and then silence, and then nothing for 4,000 years. 11 years after that last signal, the Council had formally declared humanity extinct. I know this because I voted on that declaration. I had been a younger archivist then, 200 years into my career, already considered one of the great institutional minds of my generation. I had reviewed the evidence with great care. I had concluded, along with the majority, that no civilization simply vanishes without cause, and that the most likely cause was catastrophe, biological, astronomical, or self-inflicted. We had struck them from the living record. We had taken their star systems. We had erased their seat at the council table and quietly distributed the physical space they had once called home. I had done all of that. I had signed my name to all of that. I read Orland's report again, and the cold thing that had been sitting in my chest since I opened the file began to take on a shape I recognized. It was guilt. I flagged Orland's report as urgent and sent it to the 3 senior council members who chaired the Boundary Committee. Then I sat very still and thought about a thing I had not thought about in a very long time, what the humans had actually been like before they disappeared. They were not the most advanced species in the council. They were not the oldest, or the largest, or the most militarily capable. They had been, in the grand scheme of galactic civilization, a middle-tier member, clever negotiators, occasionally brilliant, often unpredictable. They had a habit of arriving at solutions that no one else had considered, not because they were smarter, but because they approached problems from angles that seemed almost deliberately inconvenient. Other species planned for the most likely outcome. Humans planned for the outcome they wanted and then worked backward. They were also, I recalled, extraordinarily patient when they chose to be. In negotiations that other species abandoned after years of gridlock, humans would simply stay at the table. They never seemed to need resolution as urgently as everyone else. One of their ambassadors had once told me, in a tone I had found puzzling at the time, that their greatest cultural advantage was that they were very comfortable with waiting. I had not thought about that statement in 4,000 years. I was thinking about it now. The committee meeting was called within the hour. I attended in silence and listened as the senior members reacted to Orland's report with the same mixture of skepticism and unease that I had felt. There were proposals for a follow-up survey, for more detailed probes, for discretion. Nobody said the word that was sitting in all of our minds. I said it. I said, what if they are not gone? The chamber went quiet, not the comfortable quiet of a pause, the sharp, breathless quiet of a room full of people who have just heard something they do not know how to process. Then the arguments began, and they were loud, and they went on for a very long time, and by the end of the session we had agreed on exactly one thing. We would send a probe. A single automated probe, long range, equipped with passive sensors only, sent quietly into the dead spiral with orders to observe and return. No transmissions, no announcements. We did not want to attract attention. In hindsight, the idea that we could move through that region without being noticed was the most perfectly foolish thought I had entertained in 4 centuries of institutional thinking. The probe launched at dawn of the following cycle. We expected it to take 4 months to reach the anomaly and another 4 to return. It came back in 11 days. It had not been to the anomaly at all. Something had intercepted it at the border of the dead spiral, examined it with thoroughness I could not understand from the sensor data alone, and sent it home. Attached to its hull, physically fastened with a mechanism none of our engineers recognized, was a small container. Inside the container was a data chip. I was the one who read it. That was the moment the cold fear in my chest stopped being a vague weight and became something sharp and specific. That was the moment I understood that whatever the humans had become in 4,000 years of silence, they already knew everything we had done. And they had decided it was time to talk. The data chip was not encrypted. That was the first thing that unsettled me, because everything about the situation suggested caution, and yet the humans had sent their message in plain galactic standard, readable by any device, accessible to anyone who picked it up. There was no attempt at secrecy, no layered code to make us feel the contents were meant only for us. They wanted us to know that they did not feel the need to be careful. The message was 47 seconds long. I played it alone in my archive room, with the door sealed and the monitoring system switched off, not because I intended to hide it, but because I needed to hear it once by myself, before I decided what to do with it. I needed time to think without anyone watching my face. The voice was human. Female, I believed, though human vocal characteristics had always been difficult for my species to read with precision. She spoke slowly and clearly, in the archaic galactic standard that humans had used 4,000 years ago, with every word placed with the deliberate care of someone who has rehearsed not because she is nervous, but because she wants to be certain she is understood. She said, "This message is addressed to the Galactic Council and to all species currently operating within the boundaries of the former human sovereign space. We are aware that those boundaries were withdrawn following our departure. We hold no immediate grievance regarding that action. We hold many grievances regarding the actions that followed. You are invited, and we use that word with full awareness of what we could have said instead, to present yourselves at the coordinates attached to this message, at the date and time also attached. The location is your council grand chamber. We will come to you. We ask only that the full council be present. We ask that the session be recorded. We ask that when we speak, you listen." She paused. "We have been listening to you for a very long time." Then the message ended. I sat in the silence afterward and tried to count how many ways what I had just heard could be interpreted. I could not find a single interpretation that did not have weight behind it. Even the polite parts were heavy, especially the polite parts. The date they had specified was 63 days away. The coordinates were exact, not just the grand chamber, but the specific docking approach vector, the specific arrival window, the correct atmospheric pressure protocols for receiving a human delegation. Someone had done precise, detailed research on a facility that had been built after the humans disappeared. Someone had been watching us build it and had learned our procedures without ever making contact. I called the emergency session. The council chamber at full emergency capacity is one of the stranger experiences available to any political observer. 41 species, representing physiologies that range from the gas-breathing Alhari to the crystalline Cess, all crammed into a space designed for maximum mutual discomfort and minimum efficient communication, because that is, in practice, what diplomacy requires. Everyone must be slightly uncomfortable. That way, no one is comfortable enough to stop paying attention. I had attended hundreds of emergency sessions. I had never seen the chamber this quiet. I presented the message. I played it twice at the request of the Mechari representative, who insisted she had misheard the phrasing around the word departure. She had not misheard it. The humans had said exactly what she thought they said, and the second listening only made the room quieter. The questions came fast after that. How did they intercept the probe? The probe was running silent, no active transmissions. They found it anyway. How did they know the chamber's specifications? The grand chamber was built 2,000 years ago. They have been gone for 4,000. Someone was watching. What do they want? The message said to be heard. That answer satisfied no one. The debate that followed lasted 9 hours. I will not record every argument here, because most of them were repetitive and several were embarrassing in ways their speakers will not thank me for preserving. The essential positions sorted themselves into 3 groups quite quickly. The first group, led by the Mechari and supported by the Sahari and 3 of the smaller species, argued for compliance. They were outnumbered but articulate. Their point was simple. We do not yet know what the humans have become, and until we know that, aggression is the most dangerous possible response. The second group, which held the majority of council votes at that moment, argued for military preparation. Not aggression, they were careful to say preparation. They wanted the Council Defense Fleet positioned around the Grand Chamber before the humans arrived. They wanted options. The third group argued for denial. They proposed formally challenging the authenticity of the message, stalling the timeline, commissioning an investigation into whether the humans actually still existed or whether some other party was using human identity for unknown reasons. This group was the loudest and had the least to offer, but in any body of 41 civilizations, the loudest voices always need to be heard before they will agree to sit down. I spoke twice. The first time I argued against the military positioning, not because I was certain the humans were peaceful, but because I understood, in a way I struggled to articulate clearly enough for the chamber, that any species capable of watching us for 4,000 years in perfect silence was not a species that would be deterred by a visible fleet. Showing them weapons would not make us safer. It would only show them that we were afraid and that we responded to fear with force. This argument did not carry. The fleet deployment was approved. The second time I spoke, I said something that I knew would not be popular, but that I believed needed to be in the official record before we arrived at that meeting. I said that if the humans had indeed been present in this galaxy for the past 4,000 years, watching and listening, then they already had answers to every question we might try to evade. I said that whatever posture we adopted, military, diplomatic, or evasive, we should adopt it knowing that the humans would see through it completely. There was a pause after I said that. Then the Mechari representative asked quietly what I recommended. I said honesty. The chamber did not react well to that. In the days that followed, the Grand Chamber was quietly reinforced. The defense fleet, 4,000 vessels, the largest coordinated force the Council had assembled in 800 years, was positioned in a wide arc around the Council's home system, cloaked and on silent running, under orders to observe and report. Not to intervene officially, but the weapons were armed. I watched the preparations and thought about the human ambassador who had told me, long ago, that their greatest advantage was patience. I thought about what it meant that they had waited 63 days worth of silence after sending their message. Not one word more, not one clarification, not one follow-up to check that we had received it. They knew we had received it. They were waiting. The 63rd day arrived the way significant days always do, faster than expected, and with the strange quality of a morning that feels different from the moment you open your eyes, though nothing has visibly changed. The council chamber was full. Every representative was present. The recording systems were running as the humans had requested. The fleet was in position. At precisely the time the humans had specified, the sensors around our home system lit up with readings that our best analysts spent the next several minutes simply staring at, in silence, before any of them thought to say anything. The readings were not of ships. They were not of a fleet or a weapon platform or anything our databases contained a classification for. At the edge of our system, space itself had changed shape. Something was there that had not been there before. Something enormous and geometrically precise and utterly silent, and it had arrived without crossing the distance between itself and us. It had simply appeared, the way an answer appears at the end of a long equation, as if it had always been the natural conclusion of the numbers, and we had simply failed to see it coming. The defense fleet, 4,000 vessels with armed weapons and orders to report, reported one thing unanimously. None of their systems would respond. Not jammed, not disabled. The ships were intact, the crews were unharmed, the controls were functioning normally. But when any crew member reached for anything designed to cause damage, the action simply did not complete. No error message. No resistance. The intention met a quiet, total absence of effect, like reaching for something in a dream and finding that your hand passes through it. Then a single shuttle left the structure. Small, simple, moving at an unhurried speed. It passed through 4,000 silent warships without pausing. It docked at the Grand Chamber's main approach with the precise use of our atmospheric protocols, exactly as the message had described. One person stepped out. She was dressed in plain clothes, dark fabric, no insignia, no uniform. She appeared young, perhaps 30 years of age by human reckoning, with short brown hair and the calm expression of someone who has prepared very thoroughly for a meeting and is not surprised by anything they find when they arrive. She looked at me first. I was the only one standing at the entrance. Everyone else had moved back from the door with the involuntary instinct of creatures who do not know what they are facing and choose distance as a default. She looked at me and said, in perfect modern galactic standard, without accent or hesitation, "You must be the archivist. I was told you would be the one to meet us." I said, "Us." She smiled, and it was a very small smile. "There are only 41 seats in your chamber. I brought 41 representatives, one for each of you. We thought it was a reasonable ratio." I asked her name. She said, "Mara Solen, and before you ask, no, I am not here to negotiate. We finished being interested in negotiation a long time ago. I am here to give testimony, and then I am here to ask your council a question that has needed asking for 4,000 years." She walked past me into the chamber with the easy confidence of someone returning to a room they have visited many times before. I followed her. Behind me, 40 more humans filed in from the shuttle. None of us said a word. The 40 humans who entered the grand chamber behind Mara Solen were as unremarkable in appearance as she was. They wore no armor, carried no visible equipment, displayed no insignia of rank or power. They were men and women of various ages and appearances, and they moved with the quiet, unhurried certainty of people who have never needed to announce themselves because they have always known, with complete confidence, exactly where they stand. They took their seats, and I noticed, with a chill I could not fully explain, that they had already known which seats were available. They did not look around the chamber for guidance. They did not ask. They simply found their places and sat down as if they had attended this session before. The chamber was absolutely silent. Mara stood at the central address position, which is the raised circular platform at the heart of the grand chamber designed for the presenting speaker in formal sessions. She had not been shown to it. She had walked directly to it without hesitation, as though she had stood there before, or had studied its location so thoroughly that the difference was meaningless. She looked at the 41 representatives of the Galactic Council. She took a breath, and then she did something none of us had expected. She was quiet for a full 10 seconds, looking slowly around the room, meeting the eyes or the equivalent visual organs of each representative in turn. Not aggressively, not theatrically. She was simply looking at us, all of us, one by one. When she spoke, her voice was level. She said, 4,012 years ago, the people of humanity looked at this council and made a decision. The decision was not made in anger. It was not made in fear. It was made after a very long period of careful observation, during which we concluded that this body, despite its stated principles, despite its founding agreements, despite the genuine good intentions of many of its individual members, had become something that caused more harm than it prevented. We had tried to change that from the inside. We had raised concerns, filed formal objections, proposed structural reforms, and asked, politely, more times than I will count today, that this council be held to its own stated values. She paused. We were managed. We were thanked for our contributions. We were told our concerns were noted. And then the meetings ended and nothing changed. The Mekari representative, whose name was Doral, leaned forward slightly. She was one of the most experienced diplomats in the chamber, a species known for their ability to read the emotional state of almost any organism. She said, carefully, "You said you made a decision. What was the decision?" Mara looked at her. "We left," she said, "and we watched." That was when the chamber began to understand what they were dealing with. The humans had not fled. They had not been destroyed, had not suffered a catastrophe, had not collapsed under the weight of internal failure. They had looked at the Galactic Council, concluded that it was not worth their continued membership, and withdrawn, quietly, completely, and without a farewell, into a silence so total that every civilization in the galaxy had concluded they were dead. And then, for 4,000 years, they had watched. Mara raised one hand. A display opened in the center of the chamber, not projected from any device anyone in the room had brought, not using any system built into the grand chamber. It simply appeared, a three-dimensional field of organized data, hanging in the air with perfect clarity. "This is the archive," she said. "We call it the record. It contains a complete account of every significant action taken by this council or by its member civilizations in the past 4,000 years, organized by date, by subject, and by outcome. It includes full documentation of decisions made in closed session, private communications between representatives, and internal strategic planning that was never entered into the official record." The room went very still. "We want to be clear," Mara continued. "We did not obtain this information through coercion. We did not break into your systems. We watched. We listened. Where you spoke aloud, we heard. Where you wrote things down, we read them. Where you acted, we recorded the consequences. We have been doing this continuously, without interruption, for 4,000 years. There is nothing in this archive that was not available to anyone with the patience and the capability to observe carefully over a very long period of time." The Ulhari representative, a vast atmospheric being who communicated through a translation collar, produced a low, resonant sound that the collar rendered as, "That is not possible. The security protocols of this council." "Your security protocols," Mara said, without sharpness but also without apology, were designed to keep secrets from civilizations operating at a technological level similar to your own. They were not designed for what we became while we were away. We do not hold that against you. You had no reason to design for us. The first genuine argument broke out then. Several representatives spoke at once. The translation system struggled with the overlap. The Mechari delegate Doral raised both of her primary limbs in the formal gesture that requests silence, and after a long, ragged moment, the chamber quieted. Mara had not moved during any of it. She stood at the address platform with her hands resting at her sides, watching the disruption with the patient attention of someone observing a predictable natural event. When the room was quiet again, she said, "I will not read the entire record today. That would take longer than any of us has time for. What I will do is present the cases that we believe are most relevant to the question of accountability. I will begin with the matter of the Cheth." At the word Cheth, the Sahari representative made a sound that my translator flagged as involuntary. The Sahari and the Cheth shared a border. Everyone in the chamber knew the history. Most of them had never discussed it publicly. The Cheth were a small species, a quiet civilization of about 4 billion individuals who had occupied 3 star systems in the inner rim for about 6,000 years. They were not members of the council. They had applied for membership twice and been declined both times, officially for failing to meet the developmental benchmarks required for consideration, though the documents Mara now pulled from the record showed something considerably different. The Sahari had lobbied against Cheth membership because the Cheth's home systems sat on a mineral corridor that the Sahari had been quietly exploiting for 300 years. Council membership would have given the Cheth the legal standing to challenge that exploitation. The lobbying had been conducted through private channels, framed as genuine developmental concerns, and had left no trace in the official record. 1,200 years ago, a conflict in the inner rim, one that the record showed had been quietly encouraged by 2 council members who stood to benefit from the resulting territorial reorganization, had spread to the Cheth systems. The council had debated intervention. The debate had lasted 3 years. The final vote had been against intervention, on the grounds that the Cheth were not members and the conflict was technically a non-council matter. In those 3 years, the Czech population had dropped from 4 billion to roughly 600 million. Mara presented this with documents, communications, vote records, and outcome data. She presented it without visible emotion, which somehow made it land harder than any emotional delivery could have. The data was the feeling. The data was all the feeling that was needed. The Sahari representative sat completely still throughout the presentation. I watched his face and saw something I had never seen on a Sahari before. He looked like he wanted to disappear. Mara said, "The Czech are still alive. Their current population is approximately 1.2 billion, rebuilt over the past 800 years. We maintained observers in their systems throughout that period. On 4 separate occasions, when conditions arose that threatened their survival without any possibility of self-rescue, those observers intervened, discreetly, without identification. The Czech knew someone was helping them. They did not know who." She looked at a section of the chamber where the non-council observers were seated, dignitaries and representatives of smaller civilizations who attended sessions but held no voting rights. An elder of the Czech, a small figure in gray clothing who I had noted when she arrived but had not connected to the events being discussed, rose from her seat. She said nothing. She simply stood and looked at Mara. Mara looked back at her and gave a small nod. The Czech elder sat down. Her hands were trembling, and I do not think it was from age. The testimony continued for 3 days. Case after case came forward from the record, resource agreements that had been structured to guarantee the failure of smaller civilizations, intelligence shared privately between council members that had been used to destabilize non-member governments, scientific research suppressed because its conclusions would have disrupted profitable existing industries, aid delayed until the moment of maximum political leverage had passed. Each case was documented completely. Each case had been witnessed. After each case, Mara would pause and look around the chamber with the same patient attention she had shown at the beginning, as if checking whether anyone wanted to respond. Some did. The responses varied. A few representatives attempted to challenge the documentary evidence. Those attempts did not last long, because the record contained not just the primary evidence but the backup evidence and the evidence behind that, layer after layer of corroboration stretching back centuries. Several representatives attempted to argue context, that decisions made in complex political environments could not be judged by the standards of a different era. Mara listened to each of these arguments fully, without interrupting, and then addressed them directly, specifically, and without leaving room for further deflection. On the second day, she called me to the address platform. I had known it was coming. She had referenced the archival records repeatedly, and I was the archivist. But knowing something is coming and being ready for it are not the same thing. I stood at the platform and looked at the chamber and said the only thing I could say with integrity, the truth. I had voted to declare humanity extinct. I had done so based on evidence that I had believed was complete and that I had not examined as critically as I should have, because the conclusion that a troublesome species with strong opinions about council conduct had simply removed itself from the picture was, I recognized only now, one that certain powerful members of the council had wanted to reach. I had not been paid for my conclusion. I had not been pressured into it. I had simply been a person who was smart enough to find the evidence that pointed in a comfortable direction and thorough enough to document it so convincingly that no one questioned the underlying motivation. That is a quiet kind of failure. It is the kind that leaves the smallest footprint and does the most lasting damage. When I was finished, I returned to my seat. Mara said without any edge in her voice, "Thank you, archivist. Your honesty is noted in the record." On the third day, she made the proposal. The council, she said, would be dissolved, not destroyed, not punished as a body, dissolved, formally and permanently, as a governing structure. A new body would be established, the Galactic Compact, with one essential structural difference from the old council. The species with seats of real authority would be drawn primarily from those who had been most harmed by the old council's failures. The Cheth would have a seat. 14 other civilizations that had been formally excluded from council membership would have seats. The old council species could participate, but not lead, not for a period of at least 200 years, which was the minimum time Mara considered necessary to establish that the new structure was genuinely different in practice rather than just in name. The humans would hold no seat. That surprised everyone, including me. Mara explained, "We did not return to take power. We returned because power in this galaxy had been held too long by too few, and the record of what that produced is sitting in front of you. We will serve as the Compact's independent observers. We will maintain the record. We will have no vote, no veto, and no formal authority. We will simply watch as we have always watched, with the understanding that if we ever find it necessary to step in again, we will." She did not need to elaborate on what step in might mean. Everyone in the chamber had already experienced, over the past 3 days, exactly how thorough the humans were in everything they chose to do. The vote was held on the morning of the 4th day. The result was 38 in favor of dissolution, 2 against, and 1 abstention. I cast the 38th vote, the deciding one. I thought as I pressed the confirmation about a junior cartographer named Orlin who had looked at a gravitational anomaly and had the instinct to report it rather than explain it away. That small act of honesty was what had started all of this. I hoped Orlin understood that. I thought the least I could do was honor it. The Grand Chamber had never been so full of silence as it was in the hour after the vote. Not the silence of shock. We had moved past shock somewhere in the middle of the 2nd day of testimony. This was the silence of people who have just made a choice they cannot take back and are sitting very still with the weight of it. 41 civilizations, centuries of shared history, shared decisions, shared failures. And now a formal end to the structure that had held all of it together, imposed not from outside by force, but from inside by a vote that most of us had understood in our quietest moments, was the only honest option we had left. I stayed in my seat long after the other representatives had left. The chamber systems cycled into their low-light maintenance mode around me, and the enormous windows that looked out over the council's home system went dark as the orbital station rotated away from the local star. I sat in the growing dimness and thought about 4,000 years. Not about what the humans had done during those years. Not about the record or the testimony or the cases that would take historians generations to fully process. I thought about the simpler fact underneath all of it, that an entire civilization had looked at the galaxy they lived in, decided it was not good enough, and chosen to leave and build something better in private, with no audience and no recognition, simply because it was the right thing to do. They had not needed anyone to watch them do it. They had not needed credit. That thought was sitting with me 3 weeks later when I met Mara Solen for the last time before she returned to whatever the humans now called home. I still did not know where their civilization was physically centered, and she had given no indication of volunteering that information. We met in a small meeting room adjacent to the chamber, one of the informal spaces used for side conversations and private negotiations. She brought tea, actual tea, a human preparation I had heard of but never experienced, made from dried plant matter steeped in hot water in a way that produced a drink that was simultaneously simple and surprisingly complex. She poured 2 cups. I held mine with the careful attention of someone who is not sure they are doing it correctly. She seemed to find this gently amusing. I asked her the question that had been sitting in my thoughts since the 2nd day of testimony. I said, "Why did you wait as long as you did?" She looked down at her cup for a moment before answering. "We tried earlier," she said. "About 800 years after we left. We had reached a level of development where we believed we could engage with the Council meaningfully, from a position of genuine capability rather than mere membership. We approached through quiet channels, 3 representatives we had identified as genuinely principled individuals. We offered documentation of specific abuses. We offered support for reform measures. We asked for nothing in return, except a real attempt to change the underlying structure. She paused. One of those representatives was removed from her position within a year, on fabricated charges that were presented as administrative concerns. The second was given a series of increasingly meaningless assignments until she retired. The third took the documentation we provided and used it to strengthen her own political position within the council without acting on any of its contents. I said, "You could have intervened directly at that point. You had the capability." "We had some of the capability," she said. "Not all of it. And more importantly, intervention without legitimacy is just a different kind of force. If we had arrived then with what we had then and imposed change through capability alone, the galaxy would have accepted it because it had to, not because it understood why. Understanding is what we were waiting for." I thought about that. "The record," I said, "the testimony, you were not just presenting evidence, you were making sure the change was understood." "A structure that falls because it is pushed falls in a pile," she said. "A structure that falls because the people inside it finally understand why it should fall, that falls in a way where something better can be built from what remains." She drank her tea. I tried mine. It was warm and slightly bitter and more interesting than I had expected. I said, "The humans I knew 4,000 years ago, I do not think I understood them. I think I found them manageable and I was comfortable with that." Mara looked at me with an expression that was not unkind. "Most of the other species did," she said. "You were not wrong about what we were then. We were manageable. We were also paying attention to everything, which is a combination that tends to be underestimated." "What are you now?" I asked. She considered this question with the seriousness it deserved. "Old," she said at last. "Very old in the ways that matter, and very committed to the idea that the measure of a civilization is not what it builds for itself but what it builds for others, when no one is watching and there is no benefit in doing it." I thought about the Cheth observer, who had broken orders on 4 separate occasions over 800 years, to save a population that did not know they were being saved. "One of your people went further than their orders," I said. "The Cheth observer. They intervened when they were supposed to only watch." Mara smiled, and it was a fuller smile than any I had seen from her during the testimony. "Yes," she said. "Her name was Claire Oben. She is 147 years old, and she is going to be in significant trouble for the unauthorized interventions when she gets home." She paused. "She is also going to receive our highest recognition for them. We are still working out how to do both of those things at the same time." I found, somewhat to my surprise, that I was smiling as well. We sat in silence for a while. Outside the window, the Council's home system was doing what it always did: planets orbiting, stations rotating, ships moving between them on their ordinary courses. The ordinary machinery of galactic civilization, continuing its work regardless of what had just happened in the chamber below. I asked eventually, "Will you tell me where you went, where your civilization is physically?" She looked at me with calm, clear eyes. "No," she said, "not yet." I accepted that. She stood to leave, and I stood with her. At the door she paused and looked back at me. She said, "You voted honestly. At the end and also at the beginning, when you were the one to say the humans might not be gone. You were the only one to say it out loud in the chamber on the record. You did not have to." I said I did, it was true. She nodded as if this was exactly the answer she had expected. "That is all we ever asked," she said, "from any of you, just to say the true thing even when it is uncomfortable. The rest follows from that." Then she left. I returned to my archive room and sat at my desk and began to write. Not the official history, that would come later, a monumental project that I had already been assigned to lead, and that I expected to take the remaining centuries of my life to complete properly. What I wrote that night was something smaller, a personal record. The account of what I had seen, what I had felt, what I had understood and failed to understand over the course of 4 extraordinary days that had ended 4,000 years of silence and begun something that had no name yet. I wrote about Orland's anomaly report, and the cold fear in my chest, and the 47-second message, and Mara walking into the grand chamber as if she had always known the way. I wrote about Claire Oben, 147 years old, somewhere out there in the silence between stars, waiting to be told she had done both the wrong thing and the right thing simultaneously, and that both of those things would be recognized. I wrote about the vote, and the 38th ballot, and the feeling of pressing a confirmation that could not be undone. I wrote about T. The new Galactic Compact held its first formal session 4 months later. The chamber had been redesigned, not physically altered but reorganized. The elevated central platform where Mara had stood to give testimony was removed. In its place, the seating was arranged in a full circle, with no position higher than any other. The Cheth elder, whose name I learned was Fen Alori, sat in the eastern arc of the circle, between a representative of the Ulhari and a young diplomat from a civilization called the Emran, who had spent the past 3 centuries being told they were not ready for a seat at any table. The Emran diplomat was 22 years old by her species reckoning, and she arrived at the session 40 minutes early and spent the time reading the founding documents with an attention that I found, watching her from the doorway, genuinely moving. I thought, this is what it looks like. Not the speeches, not the ceremony. This, a young person reading the rules of a new thing and taking them seriously because they actually believe the new thing might be different from the old one. That is the only way new things ever actually become different. The humans were not in the chamber. They had observers present, as agreed quiet figures sitting in the gallery above the main floor, watching. I glanced up at the gallery once during the opening remarks and caught the eye of one of them. A young man, or someone who appeared young, with an easy, alert expression that reminded me strongly of Mara. He gave me a small nod. I turned back to the session. Outside, beyond the windows of the compact's new chamber, the galaxy continued its enormous, patient turning. Stars moved through their long arcs. Ships crossed the spaces between them. Civilizations older than memory and younger than hope went about the 10,000 ordinary activities that make up the daily life of a universe that does not know it is being watched. It was all of it being watched. I had cast the deciding vote to dissolve the old order. I had signed my name, 4,000 years ago, to the declaration that the humans were gone. I had lived long enough to be wrong about that in the best possible way, and to be given the chance to do something useful with the wrongness. Not every error earns that kind of second consideration. I had been lucky. I had been honest, just often enough and just in time. I intended to be more honest going forward, more careful, more willing to say the true thing before someone with 4,000 years of patience and a perfect archive said it for me. The Compact's first session lasted 6 hours. At the end of it, the founding agreement was signed by every representative present. I was asked to witness the signing in my capacity as the new Compact's official archivist, a title I had been offered and had, after some reflection, accepted. The position was different from the old one in ways that mattered enormously. I answered now to the Compact's full membership, not to a narrow leadership committee. The archive I kept would be open, verifiable, and immune by law to alteration. The humans had insisted on that last part. I stood at the signing table and watched the representatives, one after another, add their marks to the agreement. When Fen Alori signed, her hand was steady. When the Emran diplomat signed, she paused for a moment before pressing her mark, and I saw her lips move slightly, as though she was repeating something to herself, a reminder or a promise, or simply the words of the agreement one more time, to be sure they had settled properly. When they were all done, I added my own mark. Then I picked up my recorder and my reference materials, and I walked out of the chamber into the corridor beyond, where a wide observation window looked out over open space, and I stood there for a while without writing anything or thinking anything in particular, just looking at the stars. Somewhere out there, in the silence between the known and the unknown, a civilization that had once been declared dead was living its 4,000-year-old life in ways I could not fully imagine, building things no one else had built, thinking thoughts shaped by millennia of isolation and purpose, and the particular kind of clarity that comes from choosing, deliberately, to step away from a world that is not yet ready for you, and waiting with patience that is not passive but active, not absence but presence, not forgetting but remembering everything, until the moment when your return means something real. I had once thought the most powerful thing in the galaxy was a large enough fleet or a well-placed majority vote. I had been wrong about that too. The most powerful thing I had ever encountered was a civilization that had looked at its own reflection in the mirror of galactic history, had not liked what it saw developing, and had chosen to spend 4,000 years becoming worthy of the moment they were building toward. Not for recognition, not for dominance, not for the satisfaction of being proven right, but because they believed, with the quiet and absolute conviction of people who had thought about it for a very long time, that the galaxy deserved something better than what it currently had, and they had been willing to wait until they could provide it. I stood at the window a little longer. Then I went back to work.